Hello, this is James Horak. I am bringing you a show tonight, including Crystal Clark and myself. Crystal is going to deal with the conclusion of her presentation on the Trans-Pacific Partnership and its imminent intention to reach agreement this October 1st. I'll turn it over to Crystal. Crystal?
Thanks, James. I think maybe first we should thank our listeners and let them know that we actually have a radio show. We've been so busy, and we just really haven't had time to promote it, which is completely antithetical to having a radio show because you're trying to reach people, and it helps if they know you actually have one. So just so that people know, this is actually our third episode, and we have David Corso to thank for this show and his persuasiveness. He's persuasive, I think, in a way only he can be. So thank you for that, Dave. But just so people know, the show is called NWO Race with Time. It's hosted via the Wolf Spirit Radio Network, which is Dave Corso's project. And it's the second and fourth Friday of every month from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's free to listen live. Dave has been very, very gracious and is letting some of our other colleagues post the entirety of these shows on YouTube for free. But if you're one of those people that prefers the MP3 download, to access those files, you'll have to become a subscriber of Wolf Spirit Radio, which I highly recommend. And his fees are a little bit cheaper than some of the others that you'll find, and it's worth it. So, again, I appreciate all of Dave's encouragement and support. And I appreciate our listeners and the many people over the years who have encouraged both James and myself to do something like this. I had my own reasons for not doing it, but given the, rapidity with which everything is changing or can change, both for the better and for worse, I think that it's important that we do this. So as far as an update of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I don't really have a whole lot more. Will really empower them to get involved as individuals. There's one called the Citizens Action Network, which, you can Google that and find it. The other one is exposetheTPP.org, which is really, really excellent. At the top of that website, you'll find a few different tabs. One is called What is the TPP? The next one is How it Impacts You, Take Action, and Attend an Event. If you scroll down, you'll find wonderful resources about how to contact your representatives. There is contact info, and there is a call script. There are templates for emailing your representatives. There are sample letters to editors that you can use and sign your name to and turn into your local newspapers. There are webinars for learning and also teaching the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which include talking points, and you can also order signage if you're going to host an event. It's really, really important that we do our best to get this out because, again, this is our third show. The second show was about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how it really is the corporate charter for the New World Order. And it basically strips sovereign nations of their rights. And that trickles down to the individual not being able to have any type of redress with their own government because their own governments are submitting to this. So it's not a good thing at all. There is one particular update that I would like to make, and that was in that last show. Before it happened, because it was really kind of a crash course that I took to share it, I could not prove that Senator R. Songstad from, I think it was South Dakota, was a real individual. And the reason that was important is because the Trans-Pacific Partnership has a deadline of being completed at October 1st. And there are several other deadlines that you'll find on the internet chatter that are around the same time, and supposedly a lot of that information was leaked by this senator. Now, I wasn't able to prove that this was a real individual because Wikipedia does not have him listed, having been a senator of South Dakota, which is very interesting. But we did have a listener who took it upon themselves to do a great deal of research and emailed it to both James and I, and found that this really was a senator, that this really is a real person. I still don't know that this individual leaked a memo that has all of these dates in it, but these dates include, troop movements. There's a whole list of things that we actually covered in the other show, so I don't want to go over that too much more, but it is a real person. Some of the deadlines that we discussed in the last show are very dubious in that it looks like, if they're true, that all of these things are coalescing around a specific moment in time in which they're going to enact what will become really hell for the individual. And Obamacare, I think, feeds into this, and basically you're just talking about corporate control over every aspect of your lives, which is something that we really don't want to see happen, given that these are the people destroying our planet for a buck. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership gives them carte blanche to do that at levels that are unprecedented, which is not a good thing. But what we do know is, which is very unsettling and it is provable, is that the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, has ordered billions of rounds of ammunition. They've ordered guns. And I think most disturbingly, they ordered what they call no hesitation targets, which are images of pregnant women and children playing in parks to desensitize people to shooting their fellow Americans, which is very disturbing. So I don't have too much more information on that. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that, James.
Yes, it's almost the military version of the cremation of care, isn't it?
It is. I wrote an article about this, I think, last year about the cremation of care, and I don't think that people recognize that this has many different faces, many different Orwellian spin faces, and the cremation of care, the ceremony that they do, is basically tossing their cares away. And you see the New Age movement has their own version of this, where you don't actually have to do anything and get involved. You can just meditate it and hope it away. Wishful thinking will fix it. That's not going to work. Religion has their own cremation of care. Well, why should I care? Because Jesus is going to come back and fix it. Or we're going to get raptured out of here before the, quote, tribulation happens. Well, if it's a tribulation, if that's the term you want to use, we're in it right now. And you're still here, and we need you to plug in and help, because everything that's happening can be stopped, at least until we cross the threshold where it can't, and we aren't there yet. And I think that our goal mutually, James, is that we know that we are repeating the patterns of the past, and those patterns led to the catastrophic self-destruction of our ancestors and previous lineages multiple times. And you and I are very focused on doing what we can to prevent this one. Because if we don't change, we will get where we're going, and it's a place our ancestors have seen before.
Yes, it's a pattern that has been repeated, and there are archaeological records that are suppressed that tell about it. They go back to former lineages, and they were left to warn us. But downside to that, as Crystal has pointed out, is that these morons, these moral imbeciles, take that as a blueprint, and of course they are able to maintain secrecy with their wealth and their control over the military. And the message isn't reaching us, so it's done more harm than good, obviously.
Yes, that's very, very true. But there is another interesting development, and this is the UN Arms Trade Treaty, which is about gun ownership. And I think the first thing to point out about all of these treaties is that the Constitution supersedes all of them and actually prohibits them. Of course, that hasn't made a difference, because I don't even know how many Americans in this country even know that. And they're not supposed to know it, because they're not going to stand up and fight something that they don't know that is happening and that it's wrong. They have no idea. From what I understand, a couple of days ago, John Kerry signed this treaty, and it does regulate individual gun ownership. It requires lists, not just of the guns, but of the ammo, which is not good. The Arms Trade Treaty will regulate individual gun ownership all across the world, obligating each country to maintain a national control list. Now, this is the really interesting point about this, of course, which is a theme that we've seen over and over and over again. The treaty pretends that individual weapon smugglers are the main problem. So that's rather ironic, considering that we have a president who, by the way, pushed this off until the day after his election, his second re-election, so this couldn't be made public, because he resurrected it the day after he got re-elected. And now, that's interesting, given that he got his hands caught in the cookie jar with Fast and Furious and shipping guns to Mexico.
Yes. What people have to understand about Fast and Furious is not that it is to lend support to a predominant drug gang in Mexico, because maybe that's the cleanest way for them to do business. People that are trafficking with drugs themselves, like our government. But it also is indicated by the number of arms that have been intercepted coming back into this country from Mexico, that were many of them identified as U.S. military that had been given under this program Fast and Furious coming back. And this was in the state of Arizona to ranches that had been taken over by these gangs after they crossed the border. So what sense does all this make? Only one, that this administration and its minions intend to enforce these dubious actions and betraying the only social contract we have with them, the Constitution that they have sworn an oath to uphold and protect, but instead are arming Mexican gang members for their search and seizure operations, as well as foreign mercenaries, Blackwater, because they're not so sure that their own military, many of whom I doubt very seriously, would be willing to go house to house, search and seizure, and kill people on a blacklist. So what we have here is a clear definition, a clear intent on what Fast and Furious really was, what it was intended for, is only sense it makes, and that this is to be taken seriously. We have high treason. We have it in our face. And it's up to the individual to decide on what side he wants to be when the cards fall.
Yes, that's true. And this isn't the first time this has happened. So we have an administration that was smuggling guns to Mexican gangs who are known for beheading Americans. And now we have the same administration giving guns to Syrian rebels who fillet people and eat their organs. And the reason that this is treason is because the Constitution very clearly states that arming enemy combatants of the United States is treason. It's treason.
Amen.
Yeah. So people are looking the other way. They're looking the other way, and they're looking the other way, and they're looking the other way, and they can't figure out why it's gotten so bad. And if they don't stop looking the other way, it's going to get a lot worse, and it's going to get a lot worse sooner than later. So that's something that we really want to try to reach people about. Again, and we've mentioned this before, I think, in the first show, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth and in one sentence say, well, I have a government for and by the people, when you've decided not to be one of those people. It doesn't work like that. So people need to take self-responsibility, and you hear people say, well, we live in a lawless nation. Well, we do. We have people in Congress with dual citizenship. That's illegal. Which country are they loyal to? Well, those
the
who have
one country that has done more espionage to this country than any other, Israel.
That's right. And this is the other thing, too, which, again, we mentioned during the last show on the TPP. The UN is involved in this. The UN is basically a front for the New World Order. And this is painfully obvious when you see what's happening to Syria, what happened to Libya, what they want to do to Iran, and you have other member nations blatantly pointing out that this is wrong. There is no evidence that Syria's done anything wrong. There's no evidence these other countries have done anything wrong, but they're going after them anyway. So one of the other issues about this is when it comes to this treaty that I was talking about, Article 16 allows for UN personnel to help U.S. law enforcement implement the treaty obligations, and also opens the door to U.S. taxpayers footing the bill for other countries' treaty implementation. Article 14 appears to authorize the president to create whatever domestic gun control laws are needed to enforce it and become compliant. So, this is one of those things where there's a lot of confusion out there. You have a lot of people saying, well, look, we just need a brand new system of government. But what they don't take the time to address is that the system of government we have was very early on, since its inception, meddled with and pushed off track. So, and again, all these people that say, well, the government's for me and by me never did anything about it. They didn't correct it. So now we have lawlessness. And it's lawlessness because the public servants who violate the laws and rules set down in the Constitution, at no point are they called on it. So it's basically like saying, well, look, James, you can go rob a bank and, well, I'm busy, I'm going to look the other way. So after you've done it 2 or 3 times, what's your incentive to stop doing it? There isn't any.
No.
So again, people have to begin to understand and learn the rules and laws that their country was founded on, who's violating them, and then make sure that these people are either brought up on the appropriate charges and jailed or fired. And if you really believe they work for you, then you need to fire them. That's the way it works. You can't put your head in the sand. You can't pass the buck. Believe me, I get that people are tired. They're tired and they're broke. But that's a byproduct of the lawlessness and the greed and the arrogance. So do we need a new system? I think personally I would like to see how the original system actually functions when it's not corrupt, and we make sure it's not corrupted.
Well, for 125 years, we had an adequate Supreme Court that did its job. The creeps that we have as justices of the Supreme Court today are traitors, they're treasonous, they're the most rotten element of humanity. We have our last addition to the Supreme Court, Sotomayor, who went on record saying that she thought all white men should be castrated. Now, along with philandering, along with being found unfit by different legal boards, all of these goodies, and it seems that these are recommendations for a president to appoint one of these critters to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, a court that once had the prestige of nominating and of appointing only people of the highest character and reputation. Instead, we have people that are no longer even aware of constitutional law, much able to enforce it with judicial review, and who are so corrupt and so capable of maligning the law that they commit treason with almost every legal opinion they hand down. I have never seen anything in my life more undermining of the American way of life than what has happened to the Supreme Court in the last 30 years.
That's very true. And again, during the last show we did on this, and these videos are posted both on my website, which is drowninginabsurdity.wordpress.com, and at your website, which is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. And there's a summary with links at the bottom, and there was an excellent video produced by a fellow named Larkin Rose called It Can't Happen Here, where he goes over this and how the corruption of the Supreme Court was a necessary gateway into the corruption that we have now. It was one of the first steps. We hear a lot of people say, yeah, things are bad. And then what do we get after that? We get shoulder-shrugging. Yep, things are bad. Well, why? Where were you when all of this happened? Where was I? Where was James? Where are we now? This isn't going to take care of itself. It has to be addressed, and these people have to be held accountable, and that's just the political corruption. But at the end of the day, what all of this eventually boils down to, especially because if this Trans-Pacific Partnership goes through, we're talking about a global corporate conglomerate running everything, and running it in a way that is so corrupt that if you have strict environmental laws and you refuse to give them permits to frack or drill or mine, they can sue you for their, quote, right to make money and destroy your water sources, your food sources in the process. And well, that's just the cost of doing business, and that's too bad for you. And this is something that I've tried for the last few years to really kind of drive home. And I can see that, you know, whether it's me or whoever else trying to teach people this, that the message is finally getting across. The overpopulation lie is based on teaching you, the 99%, that you're the dummies messing everything up. You're the useless eaters. You're the mindless breeders and the sheeple, and you have too many babies. And that's what's killing the planet. What's killing the planet is corporations. It's corporations killing the planet. You and I don't put fluoride in the water. You and I don't chemtrail. You and I don't make vaccines. You and I didn't develop Corexit and dump it in the Gulf of Mexico. You and I didn't build a bunch of faulty nuclear plants and put them all on fresh water sources. You and I didn't cause Fukushima. You and I aren't fracking. They're doing it, and they're blaming it on us. And that's something that we really have to get straight, because if you think it's bad now, if the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes through, it will be 1,000 times worse. And I know that people get really overwhelmed with all of this, and then they feel, hopeless or depressed. But really the antidote to that is, the reason that people feel hopeless and depressed is because they're not getting involved. So they can't wake up every day and know, I'm doing something to prevent it. I'm doing something to fix it.
They can't even know that they have options.
That's right.
If they don't. If you know common law, you know how to plead for yourself effectively. It may not always work, but it is your only hope to get justice in a court that is not going to accept that you have anything like human rights.
That's right, and it's shocking to me to see videos about how some South American country gave dolphins human rights. The humans on this planet don't have human rights. They're just words on a piece of paper. That's all they are. And people let it go. Well, we can't let it go anymore, because this is the path to self-destruction, and it's preventable. It's preventable, but in order for that to happen, we have to get involved. The awakening is really, really important, because obviously people aren't going to get involved in something they don't know is going on, but then the action phase has to happen. And many people have talked about this, myself included, but if it was a numbers game, if everybody was taking action and it was a numbers game, we would have won a long time ago.
I think one of the interesting examples of something that just recently came up, I was sent today a link by a friend where the NRA was promoting a big game hunt. One of these hunts where you have captive animals, big game, elephants, rhinos, lions, shooting them like fish in a barrel. That's supposed to be sport. I told the people, please know that NRA sold out years ago to the powers that be. This is a subtle move by them to help with gun control, to help get this treaty approved and accepted, because you've got a number of people that are concerned about this kind of killing of animals, and I am one. Hunting to me is you go out for something to eat, and you abide within the law. You are doing it not for trophies. You're not doing it for any other reason than you like venison, or you like antelope. You like whatever is the game that you're hunting legally, and it has a chance. It's not fish in a barrel day. So the NRA does this, and people that may be on the edge of deciding whether or not they would support gun control are again confused and identify the NRA with gun owners who own guns to protect their family, and not just from criminal intruders, but criminal government out of control intruders. We have afforded us plainly in the prelude to the Constitution our Bill of Rights, which explicitly states this. So they identify the NRA with gun owners, and let me tell you this, many people have pulled away from the NRA and joined other organizations like the NGA. And they are looking for people who represent sincerely and honestly the concerns of American people, to enjoy and understand full well the reason the Second Amendment is there.
Yes, and that's an important point to make, because it looks like they're shifting towards big game hunting is a way to distract from the real purpose of the Second Amendment, and it's not to hunt.
Exactly. It never was. And
That's right.
Our forefathers understood very much that there was among us fifth columnists, people that were loyal to King George, people that even after the Continental Army succeeded and Cornwallis signed a peace, knew that the struggle had not ended there. And indeed, in 1812, the English again invaded the United States and burned our capital to the ground, because that obsession of the crown is still there today. It has contaminated our legal system. Most courts have an admiralty flag, and each of you need to do a little research to understand what that means. Most of the lawyers that we have today would give their eye teeth to be knighted by the Queen of England. This is a confusion of loyalties.
Yeah, and in fact, doesn't the bar exams down for the British something?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's not even an American test that they pass, which should tell people a lot. Isn't Eustace Mullins, is that his name? Did I get that right? Isn't he a good source for that if people want to look up?
He's an excellent source. He's a grand old man of bringing back constitutional law and giving you a framework by which you can make pleas on the basis of common law. And, of course, I have a good lawyer, but he still thinks that common law is passé. It's just like a doctor that gets his information from JAMA or Lancet. They think that that's the beginning and end all of their medical education after post-medical school. But it's not. And it's not true for doctors. The parallel carries both ways. But nonetheless, accept the law that represents the values that you were taught, whether they're religious, whether they're constitutional. And remember, the only contract that we are obliged to follow is the one social contract this country's legal system and government is based on, and that's the Constitution. And they may tell you it's invalid. They may tell you it's passé, but it's only invalid and passé if you let it be invalid and passé. If you stand up for it, it will stand. It is the only sense of righteousness and strength the common man has today, because these monsters aren't satisfied with getting rid of the Constitution. They will go on to get rid of everything that grants any citizen any rights whatsoever under any form of law.
Yes, and it's really important that people begin to understand that their silence is consent. Too many people believe that if they don't make a choice by not choosing to do something about it, they're not responsible because they haven't made a choice. Well, it's consent. There is no fence. People think there's a fence that they can sit on and kind of wait and see which way things fall before they get involved. Well, if they don't get involved, they're at the mercy of somebody else's decision. And I think it's really important what you just said, that this is where the Constitution is where they get their authority from. It outlined their job descriptions and what they're supposed to do. This is why they take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And you have explained before, very beautifully and succinctly, I think, the difference between a regime and an administration. An administration administers the laws that were set long before they got there. A regime does whatever they want.
That's right. An administration administers the law, which we used to call the law of the land. Today, we can define it more appropriately as the Constitution. And the Constitution is what I accept as my social contract with this government. If they betray it, they're traitors. They have no more or any longer authority over me. And that is the way to look at this. Once that they betray their social contract to you, you no longer need to recognize their authority. All they have left is force and might, and that's why they want our guns.
It is interesting. Reuters reported on the 25th, on Wednesday, that John Kerry signed this treaty, but it still needs to be ratified by the Senate. So take note of that and contact your senators and let them know. And people will ask themselves, well, does that really work? Politically, maybe not so much, but psychologically it does, because these people have gotten away with murder literally for a very long time because they thought you were asleep at the wheel. And they may not be so obliged to continue if they knew that you were no longer asleep at the wheel and that you know what's really going on and you know the score. They deserve to know that you know. That alone may change a great deal. So I encourage people to do that. But there is something else really interesting about this, because it looks like Obama has found a patsy in Kerry signing this treaty. I wasn't really sure if I was going to bring this up, but we might as well because people can go look for themselves. But there have been people saying that the Kerry that we know now is not the same John Kerry as before. And of course, that's something to be very skeptical about. But any of you, right now at this very moment, can go to YouTube and type in John Kerry has a double. And you will find a video that's 3 minutes and 11 seconds long that shows clearly two very different John Kerrys. And what's exceptional about this video is that when people are speaking, their facial muscles will move, their eyebrows and their nose and whatnot around. Well, this individual has pictures of John Kerry speaking, both John Kerrys. It's not the same person. It's absolutely not the same person. The face is different. The jaw is wider at the bottom. The new Kerry, when you're looking at the screen, it's the left eye, but it would be his right eye, is much, much smaller than the other eye. And the eyebrows are uplifted all the time, which is very different. The hair is a little bit different. So I know that a lot of people say, well, this is all conspiracy, but the reality is that the average human being has no idea how diabolical these people are and how far they will go to achieve their agenda. Is he a clone? Is he a double? Is it plastic surgery? I don't know. But I tell you, you can go look for yourself, and I would be shocked if any of you came away and said, oh, yeah, it's the same person. It's clearly not the same person.
One of the things that's interesting about this, Crystal, is there are plants out there that have injected into these conversations, oh, well, that's Botox.
Yeah, people can go look for themselves. There's no way that this is Botox. It is not the same person.
No.
There's no way.
There are people out there that behave like children, and a lot of them are being paid to get online and to confuse as many issues as they can by throwing stuff out there, and a lot of it just comes off the top of their heads. It's laughable. But to people that are not familiar with this kind of hit artist of misinformation plant, disinformation plant, and malinformation plant, if you've been on any of the forums, the online forums where people discuss issues that could take a very serious bend to the concerns of the controllers, to the social engineers of this society, you will find that there are people who attack them immediately and will say anything. They'll misquote them. They'll misrepresent what they say. They will throw any kind of wrench they can think of. They'll throw in. Many times it's preposterous. But they're there, and they're paid to be there, most of them.
Yes, that's right. Regarding this John Kerry thing, this is really almost unanimously and across the board the first question people ask when dealing with something that's just really far out of their comfort zone. Why would they do that? Now, you've shared a story about Howard Hughes, and if you would like, I think it would help people understand that this is not the first time they've done something.
No, a lot of people that had known Howard Hughes long before he became an absolute recluse in Las Vegas up in a hotel suite, grew a beard, was shooting up whatever, heroin or morphine or whatever it was, that went up to see him, said, this isn't Howard Hughes, including one of his former lovers. So I, at the time, had some connections with some researchers who were in the CIA, and I started discussing some things at the time about what was going on in the Hughes Corporation. After I put several things together, it became clear to me that Howard Hughes had died long before this imposter was planted in that hotel suite, and that the only reason that this was done was so that the military, the CIA, wouldn't have to give up the secrecy they could obtain by keeping all of the skunk works going on within the Hughes Corporation from being exposed to the litigation of settling a estate. So what they did was they kept him alive. Well, that was one thing. But when Excalibur first opened, my wife at the time and I spent a few days there.
Excalibur is a casino in Las Vegas for people that don't know.
Yes, it's a very nice casino. I was sitting playing poker late one night, and a fellow next to me said an expression in Russian. So I responded in Russian, and we started talking. He was older than me, and it came out that he was second man in his corporation. And so I said to him, yeah, you guys kept Howard Hughes alive a long time after you had put him in the ground, didn't you? And he looked at me with this shock on his face, and he said, how did you know that? I said, just common sense. He ended up offering me a job as a technical writer. It paid pretty good. But, of course, after we had had dinner a couple of times, I decided I really didn't want to have anything to do with him. And I think he decided that about me pretty well, too, because, I talked about things that demonstrated I had a social conscience. That, in my mind, justified what had been more or less my surmising. I can say that in all fairness, Howard Hughes died years before he was reputed to have died.
And based on what you just shared, the purpose for doing that and whom it ultimately benefited was the military-industrial complex.
Yes. One of the projects they were working on was being able to trace Soviet submarines of a certain type by a certain type of sound wave from any point on Earth, being able to track them.
That answers the why. Well, why would they do that? It's that saying, qui bono, right? Who benefits?
Yeah.
You and I don't benefit from any of this. And of course, the military-industrial complex saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, there are a lot of different ways that that's being applied. When all you believe is that the world is overpopulated, all you have is depopulation devices, which is also benefiting these corporations. We have a dear friend who lives in Scotland who turned us on to these videos. I think it's David Blanche. Does that sound right to you?
Pretty close. Yeah.
Okay.
A great guy.
Really, really great guy. He and a few others have been documenting everything that's going on at Fukushima since the beginning. 7 months after Fukushima happened, he came down with leukemia. And it's interesting, it didn't hit me until today, and I don't know why. But I found out this summer that a cousin of mine who lives in the Northwest near the coast of the United States also came down with leukemia. And during a private conversation we had one time, you explained to me how leukemia is caused. And if you wouldn't mind, I would like you to explain that.
Leukemia is caused from admission into the marrow of the bones of strontium-90. The body reads strontium-90 like it would calcium and welcomes it in. But when it gets into the bones, its radioactive toxicity and the fact that it's not doing any good, crowding out the marrow of the bones is where the red blood cells or erythrocytes are produced. So right there, the increasing shortage of the production of erythrocytes causes leukemia.
And that's the sole cause.
You can have other causes, but that is the predominant cause in a case of rapid onset, yes.
Okay. And where does strontium-90 come from?
It's one of the isotopes in the fallout from Fukushima, from Chernobyl, from an atomic bomb, from a nuclear device of any kind which created a fission reaction of any kind. It's part and parcel of sustained fission.
Okay. Now, some people may be asking, well, how does this fit into the depopulation agenda? Because obviously we're not going to have everybody suddenly get leukemia and die. But there's a wonderful lady that you and I have talked about before in shows. Her name is Lorraine Moret, and she's an expert on nuclear radiation poisoning. And she's been all over the world. She's done lectures, she's done talks, she's done a great deal of research in different locations, even with teeth. It contributes to diabetes and specifically causes infertility, which is very important.
Yes.
And she reported not long after Fukushima that on the West Coast, miscarriages went up 30% directly after.
And children with thyroid problems has gone up dramatically. Of course, anywhere near Fukushima, as far away as Tokyo, which I think is 90 miles from Fukushima, the incidence of thyroid problems with children is just astronomical. And of course, I only have this on the virtue of information that we have received from people that are there that, have some access to the population, because it's not coming out in their media. It's not coming out in any of the surveys of the AEC or anything official at all. There has been, in the last few days, David Blanche brings this up, some of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission people that have come out and for the first time admitted that the scale of Fukushima and its damage has been woefully underestimated. And they are speaking up finally. It's one of those things, though, that too late and too little. So if you really want to know the truth about Fukushima, Fukushima is going to impact everyone on the earth.
The exact same way that nuclear testing did.
Well, more so, far more so, because a detonation is one thing. But what we have here, we have the plume, like from a detonation, but we have a continuing plume that's been going on ever since. We have reactor cores that are burning as I speak. One of them that has an experimental type of fuel called MOX that is between 50 and 100 times more lethal. And the extent of this sustained fission is causing the production of the worst of all isotopic products, tritium, which of course is going into the ocean, and is causing a phenomenon that no one's ever had a chance to study before called atmospheric fission. Now, this could lead to something even more catastrophic than what we're talking about now. No one knows for sure. There is such a thing as a condition that can persist from or can come about by this type of thing persisting this long or longer. Then we need to be really worried about it because it'll be one of those situations where no one will find shelter. So we have a situation that has not been mitigated by any effective steps. Chernobyl was. We were lied to from the start when people were telling us, oh, well, this is not yet a Chernobyl comparable event, and it was more so from the very first day. And today it is probably, and I say this advisedly, it is probably 5,000 times worse than Chernobyl.
Yes, it's very, very bad, and I was really surprised today. I really don't even know how I came across it. I think it's pens.com. Might be .org. I'll put the link in with the summary of the YouTube video when it's released because I don't have access to it right now. But I was shocked to find that they were looking at using a neutron bomb to neutralize the radiation. Have you heard that one yet?
My God.
Yeah.
Crystal and I had talked about going into some of the ridiculous explanations that so-called scientists that, let's say, what's passing for scientists today, have put forth on what is going on with CERN. The nuclides, or what they call them now, they used to be nucleotides.
That's right.
You know, sometimes I wonder if these people really believe this manure. Maybe they do. Maybe they're that pathetic. Maybe their education is that lacking. It amazes me. You know, compartmentalization and security classifications being so stringent. I guess these people come out of school with what they know, and then it gradually deteriorates because they don't use it. They're put in a situation where they're performing this task along an assembly line of methodology or work or whatever because the government doesn't want them to have overview. Oh, no. That's where genius comes in, and, of course, genius is threatening to these monsters.
That's right. They don't want any of us to have overview. None of us.
And that's why so many of the microbiologists were killed, because you can't keep a guy that's a good microbiologist from knowing what's under his microscope. You can't keep him from doing it, so he is going to be able to put two and two together very quickly and understand that, hey, this doesn't have anything but a weapons use. Why would they bring back, for instance, a disease that has been put down? Why would they bring it back and make it even more virulent than it is? Why would they do this? What's the point in it? Yeah.
Money. Yeah.
Money and genocide. We're talking about diseases that you can't control once they're out of the bottle.
That's exactly right. And my voice is a little raspy because I got the flu from my son a couple of weeks ago. And my husband and I were talking about this. You know, the flus that they have now are nothing like the flus we had when we were children. Those lasted maybe 3 days, 7 days, maybe 10. But these affect the lungs in ways, even the children, that take sometimes a month or two to get past. they've just made a mess, an absolute mess. And I don't think it's just the weakened immune systems. I think that these are strains that are not natural.
Well, I've always believed that every 4 or 5 years they come out with a type of epidemic simply to gauge how best to spread this particular bug or this particular virus as an experiment. And of course, we know that they have been caught doing this before. But I think they've been doing it on scales that would be incomprehensible to people today unless they understood very carefully that there are such things in the planning stages as depopulation and forced vaccinations. All of these things which are not in any way really accepted by the world's population because they're hideous to contemplate. And it's only when you really do the research that you are forced to look at this and see it for what it really is. It's the drawing board plans that have been taken off the drawing board and put into effect for these last 25 or 30 years. And they're there. They have laboratories where things escape all the time. And where you have a laboratory that's hermetically sealed and you have the proper precautions, things don't escape. They escape because they intend them to escape. They want to see how devastating they are. They want to see how far they'll spread before they have to take measures to stop them, how virulent they are. What do they need to do anything more? Can they do anything more to make them worse? And it has gotten to a point now, I think, where they are on the fast track and they are not worried about antidote. They're not worried about antivirus. And this is what you see with madness. It becomes madness when you have gone way beyond your own survival, way beyond the survival of your loved ones, way beyond any hope for being able to find shelter from your own actions.
And that is, as a hero of mine, Dane Wigington, who's very involved in chemtrail awareness, that is, as he has pointed out, one of the symptoms of psychopathy, the inability to understand the consequences of their own actions.
Well, I didn't know whether you wanted to really bring it up. We talked about this, but when you start trying to identify particles that you are colliding with CERN, and you don't already know what their instability is, gauged on quantum mechanics or any of the methods that escape scientists today, and you're doing this, and you think you can identify what a charged particle is and what it isn't, and suddenly you're talking about helium having isotopes and it hasn't. You're talking about a hydrogen particle that is an enhanced hydrogen form, and you're trying to identify it as helium. Or you're doing something else equally absurd, and you still haven't corrected the myth that was extant at the time that helium was added to the periodic chart of the elements, and you're charging ahead anyway. This is absolute and utter madness.
Yes, I do want to get into that, James. I know we have a break coming up, and I thought maybe we could do that in the second hour. But before we do that, I just wanted to point out to people that in the last couple of days, they've publicly released that the police force are looking at these taser handcuffs.
Oh, wonderful.
Where they put these on and they shock you, and I think it's 80,000 volts that go through these. And collars and bracelets. And people think, well, this is new. It's not new. In the first book I wrote, which again I finished in 2008, I included the link. In fact, it was a video you could go watch because they were actually promoting it to the military-industrial complex. It was a company that was making shock bracelets for airline passengers. So if they weren't behaving, you could shock them. They were like tasers, but they're bracelets. And you see, this is what people really need to get across. They think that you're animals. They're treating you like animals. Your dogs have shock collars. When there are too many wild horses out here in Nevada, they don't relocate them. They round them up and they kill them. When there's an overpopulated segment of the animal population, that's what they do. So it's really important that people begin to understand that proper knowledge And being able to face the reality of our reality is essential. And you can't listen to these idiots like the guy that they put on national television in Japan, who went on television and said that they did studies with animals that proved people who smile a lot are not susceptible to radiation. Okay? An animal study. So the animals were smiling, apparently. People may think that James and I are hard on the New Age community, but we're talking about life and death, and people really need to get it together. You know?
That's right. That's right. Some things you can't indulge, and some things it's very difficult to sit and watch other people indulge at the expense of their own survival. We're not trying to peddle a single remedy. What we're trying to do is stir in people in awareness from information so that they can behave more wisely than they might otherwise, because we realize that you haven't been given the truth, that you have been given a false sense of comfort and a false sense of security, and that it has taken a great deal to move you off that center. But it's here. We should know by now that the American dollar is propped up by the petrodollar, and that excuse has been given for deindustrializing the country. Oh, well, don't worry about the loss of jobs. Don't worry about the loss of production or any of this. We can all base the value of our currency on the petrodollar. Well, what's going on today and what's behind all these wars in the Middle East is that more and more nations with oil are refusing to accept the American dollar in payment for their oil because they realize that there is an adjustment coming, and that adjustment will be catastrophic to Americans. It'll be catastrophic to people that have hordes and hordes of American dollars. So I can't blame Syria, I can't blame Libya, I can't blame any of the countries that are producing oil not wanting to take American dollars. And the countries that have stayed in OPEC are the countries that are responsible for supporting the United States, because that country is run by royalty or it's run by a very corrupt government, and all the rake-off is going to the leadership and not to the people.
And I would add that long term, of course, these people don't care about catastrophic dollar failure and how that's going to affect us here. They just want to be able to control it and time it, and they can't do that if they have people out there trying to do their own thing, messing up their plans. And of course, also, it's the resources that they want. And people need to begin to recognize that they are resources. So if this massive corporate conglomerate gets their way with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and there's an Atlantic Treaty as well, so they're working both sides of the globe at the same time, of course. You're talking about the ownership and management of every resource on this planet by a group of corporations, mega corporations, without borders, and transnational corporations. So that's what we're looking at, and you are a resource. And when companies are going through structural reorganization, what's one of the first things that they do? They downsize. Or if they put a little Orwellian spin on it, oh, well, they're right-sizing. So you see all of this going on, the depopulation, the wars. At this point, people know what Afghanistan was really about. It was about the opium. That's what it was about. And the mineral deposits that they have, which I think includes, I think it's lithium that they have there for the batteries. So this is what it's all about, is they want to access, own, and manage all of the global resources on this planet. But there is one more point I would like to make before we move on to the science aspect of all of this, is that another thing that's not legal is czars, or presidents appointing czars. In the past, people looked the other way because, well, you know, he doesn't really have any authority and it's only a couple. But people need to recognize that right now we have a science czar who wrote a manual on depopulation. I can't remember, it's Eric Holder, but he's our science czar.
Are you talking about the current Attorney General?
Oh, did he get promoted? Again?
Well, it's Eric Holder. Eric Holder is our current Attorney General.
Yeah, it's a sad thing. These people are sick. They don't belong in the positions that they're in. And I want to bring this up. I brought it up once before a long time ago, and I don't remember where, but it has to do with Lorraine Moret. The first time I heard her, it was in a YouTube video from several years ago where she was on the Jeff Frentz show. And she talked about how she was an aide to a woman who was working with, I think it was apes. And while she was there, she was out in the field as an assistant to this researcher. And so they were near the apes. And they noticed over time that there was this one female who had a baby and treated it really awful, didn't take care of it. And the other members of the tribe shunned her because her behavior was aberrant. And they knew it. Her reaction to being shunned was grabbing their pots and pans and, sticking them in the faces of the other apes and terrorizing them. And after terrorizing this tribe for a specific period of time, she became the alpha female. Because people don't like to deal with things, and obviously it's not just the animal kingdom, it's humans. Confrontation doesn't make you feel good. It's not something that people like to do. But at the same time, there's a time and a place for it. And the time and the place is here because, as we've explained repeatedly, depopulation is already underway. But it's the soft kill, it's the slow kill. And they're doing it from so many different angles that it's plausible deniability. You can't really blame it on this, that, or the other. It could be anything. Well, it could be a lot of things. And really, it needs to stop because if it doesn't, again, we will get where we're going. And it can be stopped. I mean, that's the thing. But we have to do it. And that's really important. So we all have to get involved, and it does really help to be involved because then you get to get up every day and say, okay, you know what? I'm making a difference. And one person does make a difference. It's the only thing that ever does. So that's really important. But in terms of the science, I meant to do more research on this so that we could get into it in greater depth. I'm not going to go as far into it as I wanted to because we don't have enough time. And there are other things that I just didn't quite get to. But I did notice that some of the comments to the YouTube videos that you've made in the past where you're discussing helium, you get these morons on there that say, oh, helium comes from the sun. They think you're just the biggest idiot ever for saying that. But they don't realize that this has been known for a long time. It's been documented, and it's a scientific fact. What's so hard about this, though, is that the people that are running all of this and running it into the ground control the flow of information. They're the people who own the media, whether it's the newspapers, the television, music. They also control the textbooks. And I've given an example of this before. A couple of years ago, my son was trying to do his homework, and he had a health book that he brought home. There were questions about the circulatory system, and I said, well, give me your book because it should be in your book. I've taught him how to look in the index for things. It wasn't there. There was no information about the circulatory system in his health book, but the very last chapter was about HMOs and insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people don't realize that their education, whether it's, public education or private education, and I think college education, is worse because the main financial contributors are corporations that keep these colleges open, and that's where their curriculum comes from. So that's a problem. So I kind of want to go over the history of helium because I don't think that people in a couple of generations, if not more, have been taught properly in school what's really going on here. And that, is always kind of my motto, is that people are participating in their own demise out of ignorance because they don't know any better, and that was purposeful. They're not supposed to know any better. And social engineers like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Kissinger have publicly stated they don't want intelligent people. They want people just smart enough to push the buttons and run the machines. They don't want any more intellectual people because that doesn't bode well for their agenda. Of course, a lot of people talk about this and refer to it as dumbing down, and that's exactly what it is. Now, this information, I went to Wikipedia to look at some of this information because that's where people go. People should know, though, and there's a video about this that they can find on YouTube, that Zionists are being taught how to go in and edit Wikipedia. They have seminars for that, just so you know. And like I said before, when I was trying to verify this claim about this Senator Songstad, and I went to Wikipedia and looked at the previous senators for that state, his name had been removed. So it's not the best source of information, but I think it's a good example to use simply because it isn't. and that in not being a good example, it's a common example of what's proffered as science when it isn't. So Wikipedia does explain how helium was discovered. I think that your explanation of it is much simpler. So if you could do that, I would appreciate it, and then we'll go from there in terms of how they're trying to lump helium in with other elements and why that's so incorrect.
Helium was discovered as an unknown gas with spectrographic analysis of the sun and the gases that were burning there. You could see a change in the graph as this particular gas began to ignite. Now,
based on the color, right?
Well, they graph it. You see one element that is burning at a certain temperature, then suddenly you see another element. The further you get away from the sun with your analysis, you see another element burning at a higher temperature come up. So as you go in closer into the corona of the sun, you see a different line at which an element begins to ignite. Now, it was never helium. Helium doesn't fuse. So what was happening, though, is that helium was changing the element that was burning, creating a different kind of reaction. Helium is to the elements what zero is to binary code. It is a condition of matter, not an element. If you look on any table, you'll see it defined as an inert gas, a noble gas. There are separate categories that it has created. The disinformation about helium began as an attempt to keep the Germans. When the Germans, before World War I, the Germans were concentrating a great deal of their war effort, the potential military effort, towards airships. But they wanted helium because it's inflammable. That would make an airship much safer, much more efficient. So in order to keep them from learning how to acquire helium as a distillation byproduct, when you distill gasoline from oil, they made up this BS about, only one place where it comes from, maybe a little bit somewhere else, but most of it comes from a natural deposit in the Texas Panhandle, and that is a crock. Because the Earth cannot hold helium, it goes right off into space once it's freed. So it never was defined as to property until this mysterious presence was showing up during the distillation process, and so they were able to confine it and begin to work with it and found out that they could reduce it to a liquid, and that the more pressure that they applied to it, compressing it, the colder it became. So this gave it a table of characteristics which they could name precisely. And so the idea, the concept, and the conditions of helium became known, but still many of its characteristics were kept secret. They were regarded as trade secrets by the few gas companies in the world that knew how to take it into a liquid and knew how, once that it came out of a liquid into a gas, how to take it back into a liquid. And there's only a few industrial gas companies that know those secrets today.
So the military-industrial complex and greedy corporations have kept the lid on this.
Yes, the worst part of that is that when it was added to the atomic chart of the elements, it was added to the periodic chart of the elements under that deception.
That's right. They have it labeled as a chemical element.
And first of all, a chemical, anything, has something it reacts to, has something it combines with to form a compound. And see that helium doesn't combine with anything. Helium doesn't react with anything. Only at fusion temperatures will helium exchange any characteristics whatsoever with an element. And that's what I talk about the sun, the secret of the sun in it being a constant energy furnace is the helium-hydrogen exchange.
All right, before we go too far down the scientific trail, I want to point out to people the inaccuracies that are on Wikipedia about helium. First and foremost, it lists helium as a chemical element and a noble gas on the periodic table, which is incorrect. It says that it exists only as a gas in extreme environments. It's the most abundant element in the observable universe, which is actually true. And then it does say that large amounts of helium are being created by nuclear fusion of hydrogen in stars, and stars are our suns.
That's true.
So that part's true. And people will recall, this is not new information. It's not like James just made all of this up, because if you'll recall, Helios and Heliopolis, well, that's a connection to helium, and they're talking about the sun. That's what that is. So this isn't a new discovery. You're not, coming off the wall with this. Interestingly, helium, one of the largest single uses of helium is for cooling of superconducting magnets. The main commercial application is MRI scanners, but they're also using it for some of the more fanciful sciences, I guess we could say. Wikipedia does admit that it's pressurizing and purge gas, protective atmosphere for arc welding. It's used for growing crystals to make silicone wafers, which again goes back to its cooling properties. And this is where it gets interesting. It's being studied for its role in superfluidity and superconductivity. And when this particular thread is followed up, you'll find that they're referring to helium as the alpha particle. And the alpha particle really smacks of what they're calling the God particle in their CERN experiments. And what's interesting about that is that if you keep researching helium, you'll find that it does have a use in accelerators in terms of the way they're explaining it. Energetic helium nuclei may be produced via cyclotrons, synchrotrons, and other particle accelerators. So that's interesting. But here's where things get a little screwy. The way that they number these elements has to do with their isotopes. So, for example, carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14 are kind of like their own species in a sense, because they all have the exact same number of protons. They have 6. We could say their base number is 6. Where you get the 12, the 13, and the 14 from is how many neutrons they have. So carbon-12 is 6 protons plus 6 neutrons equals 12. Carbon-13 is 6 protons plus 7 neutrons. Carbon-14 is 6 plus 8. Same thing. Now, this is where it gets really screwy and where you have people in the alternative community repeating black ops, phony baloney that they're mining helium-3 on the moon, because they're applying this exact same numbering system to helium, meaning that, yeah, so this is the way they're explaining it. So helium-2 is 2 protons and no neutrons and is considered unstable. Helium-3 is 1 neutron and 2 protons. Helium-4 is 2 neutrons and 2 protons. But the problem is they're trying to classify this like they're classifying everything else, and it's not like everything else. Not at all. And as you pointed out, it doesn't react to anything, and it doesn't degrade, which I think is important.
What they're identifying as helium isn't. That's the only explanation for that. They're either just that stupid, and I'm not mincing terms here. They are hiding something, and I could make a few guesses. Or they are dodging a bullet from giving away something that might be a sinister agenda.
Another one of their Frankenstein experiments.
Yeah. Well, You have an alpha particle, right?
So they say.
Then you have an omega particle.
That
and never the twain shall meet. What we're getting into is we're moving towards a concept of antimatter, aren't we?
That would appear to be the case, which I think is important for people to know. You know, the way that they're cataloging these different elements, even the carbon that I just mentioned isn't being cataloged correctly. So they're hiding an awful lot of things from people and just kind of lumping it all together to keep us dumbed down to what they're really doing. And I think that's really super important.
Their choice of terms gives it away, though. God particle.
It does, though, doesn't it? Yes.
Well, this insinuates that they think that they are nearing to being able to play God.
Yes.
It's kind of this new age tendency of some people to proclaim I am God crap. You can misuse terms where they lose all meaning. And people do that all the time. And there's certain things that apply to a concept of God that are beyond grasping, right? I mean, by virtue of definition, isn't God inscrutable? Aren't we incapable of defining God? I mean, we can't understand how a planet and a moon are round or why, but here we are, I am God. Well, then tell me why a planet or a moon is round. Tell me what the point is, how it came to be that way, whatever. To these people, I am making a vast leap when I say it's design. So if I've left them out in the cold right there, and they're calling themselves God, something is very, very wrong here, because I'm not calling myself God. I'm no closer to the face of God than anyone else.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly right. And of course, I think it's super important. I say this a lot, but I don't know that it can be said enough. The dumbing down process is part of the psychological manipulation that we often refer to as perception management or social engineering. Because people really do care. They really, really do care. You don't see all these people lining up to inject their babies with toxic vaccines because they know they're toxic. If they knew they were toxic, they wouldn't do it. So robbing people of crucial, proper knowledge is what allows them to be psychologically manipulated through their emotions, because people don't know any better. They don't have a counter to what they were just told. So they go with it, and it always affects them emotionally.
Let's look at what they're capable of. The American people have expressed that they didn't want gun control numerous times. That's why every time that these bills come up, they're defeated. Now they go through the back door illegally. They betray the trust of the American people, and they undermine their desires, their intention, their will. So they are getting militant like a terrorist, aren't they? Then the next thing,
the terrorists. That's the thing.
They are. They are. I mean, they sponsor terrorism. That is what Israel has built itself on. You know, you want to know the first terrorists in the Middle East, they were Zionists.
And all of these false flags are pulled off with actors, are designed to psychologically manipulate people because they're not being given the proper statistics about how many people actually save their own lives by being gun owners. They want people to look the other way at, oh, well, look, all these rogue people are walking into malls and schools and shooting people. There's absolutely no proof that any of that's true. And in fact, if you look deeper at it, you find out that it's absolutely not true. But they want you to believe it is.
No.
So that goes back to the psychological manipulation.
Well, let's talk what's recently happened in Syria. You know, I mentioned this before. If sarin gas was used, it has a chemical signature the same way the residue of gunpowder leaves a chemical signature. Sarin gas leaves a chemical signature with the residue that it creates. Now, this has been taken and been identified and shown to come from a company in the former Republic of Georgia, the former Republic of the USSR, and from a company that is American-owned. Now, the minute that this came up and was in discussion, everyone stopped talking about it. So it only came up, it was only mentioned briefly, but I caught it. And you probably never hear anything else about it. It'll disappear, but it came up. And the people that determined this are on record as having determined it. But as far as the media is concerned, it never existed. But you see, I was wondering about that to begin with because evidently the rebels had this sarin gas. What I call rebels, they aren't rebels. You know, a rebel is a faction of a country that turns against its government. These people aren't even Syrians.
They're mercenaries. They're sellswords.
Yeah, they're Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, paid mercenaries. Probably many of them are Blackwater or being trained by Blackwater and Mossad. And, of course, Qatar, according to different sources, Qatar is channeling the finances because they want that pipeline across Syria for their gas. And this will undermine Russia's market. They want to take a country criminally, and they're lying. I mean, big surprise. The media isn't doing its job. When has it last done its job?
Oh, I think it's doing its job very well. It's just not the job we think it is.
Yeah, not for us. Not for us. I mean, this is another thing. When you take and you stop enforcing antitrust laws that are on the books and have been on the books 75 years, and you let fewer and fewer people get more and more control over the media, more and more control over book publishing, more and more control over newspaper ownership, all betraying with criminal acts, defying the law, and the government won't do anything about it, then this is what happens. This kind of control falls in these people's hands, like Ted Turner, like Murdoch, and whatever they say goes. An editor or a journalist that goes against the grain gets fired, and then blacklisted on top of that. So that's what we have. What we have is the McCarthy era in reverse. And it's been going strong now ever since Ronald Reagan. I think Ronald Reagan was asleep at the wheel and George Bush Sr. was running the show. And he's a monster. In every way a person can be a monster.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're professional monsters. But I do want to go back to this because I think it's really important to re-inject some proper knowledge and common sense into the equation, because there are just too many well-paid people muddying the waters and confusing people so that they don't really know where their time is best spent, and they don't feel like they have any hope because always the enemy or the problem is in outer space or out of your hands, so the state has to take care of it. Well, whom does that serve?
It is always a diversion to be distracting.
That's right. And there was, some time ago, this meme that was put out into the collective via the New Age movement about carbon-14 and how the sun is doing something strange, and it's changing the way carbon-14 degrades, and it's giving us a DNA upgrade and all this other nonsense. You and I talked a little bit about carbon-14 yesterday because I did want to discuss it today, and you brought up something really interesting about carbon-14 in that it's really only good for carbon dating, but even then, the way they're teaching people that it works is completely erroneous. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to explain that a little bit. How is carbon-14 used for dating, and how should it be used, or can it be used? You know, what's wrong with the way they're selling it?
After anything has burnt, it leaves a carbon residue and develop a crystalline structure, and that will degrade similar to an isotope. But what also influences that are the salts that it picks up where it is bedded. If it's bedded in kimberlite, it's liable to become coal. If it's where water's going to soak through it or whatever, catch these salts. So many times it isn't elemental radiation we're talking about, it's conglomerate radiation. And in most cases, when you are trying to determine the age of a sediment or whatever, you concentrate on the first carbon that shows up in that sediment at that layer, stratigraphic layer. So the radiation reading that you'll get, of course, will begin at a particular time, and you can use other means of determining the age of that strata, and then you can relate that to whatever you find as far as the fire hearths and other things that are there. But if you find, for instance, carbon that is inside something that has been fired, like a clay tablet, or you can determine the time plus or minus maybe 350 years or so, you can determine the time that chemical changes in that carbon occurred once it had graphically changed. Because from that period on, once it has achieved an inorganic structure, it'll begin to degrade. That isn't totally unique to carbon, but as far as emanating radiation or whatever, so low it doesn't really make any difference. The effect of the sun wouldn't have anything to do with it. We are getting a whiter light, which means a less filtered light from the sun in the past years because of chemtrails. They're wiping out a microbe that proliferates in our atmosphere that aid in filtering our sunlight. Geoengineers tell you that they're doing this to moderate global warming, and that is another myth. Yes. Global warming is a myth.
Yes.
If anything, speaking geologically, we are not far from the beginning of a new ice age. And
That's right.
Good geophysicists have talked about that now for 30 or 40 years. But
that's right. They were drowned out by the Al Gore parade. That's
yes.
right.
And when corporations get behind people like Al Gore, they're up to no good. In this case, they found a new source of revenue. People ought to remember the radon gas scare and then the black mold scare. All of these were frauds to sell devices to ameliorate the supposed toxic effects of radon gas, because they told everybody the radon gas occurs in nature very rarely. The radon gas contamination was invariably, they were finding it had dangerous levels, was always from concrete that was mixed with conglomerate taken from uranium tailings and crap like that.
Okay, let me distill what you just said, because I don't want people to miss the importance of it. You watch these building shows, Bob Villa and those guys, and they're remodeling these houses for the wealthy people, and they're putting down these radon barriers, and they're telling the same story. Well, it comes out of the earth naturally, so you need this barrier down on your concrete slab. But in fact, what happened was they knowingly contaminated the concrete.
Well, you may have incidents of radon gas so slight that it's difficult to even register on any kind of radiation meter, even the most expensive. It's not harmful. It's not going to cause any effects or whatever, unless you live in Grand Junction or in a town where there were uranium mills, and idiots went out and got tailings from the uranium mill and used them as a conglomerate in concrete that was poured to make the basement of that home.
Okay, so as far as you know, this contamination only affected people in the Grand Junction area.
Are areas where a similar circumstance happened, like in Tennessee.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. I did a show a couple of months ago with this fellow in Utah. I think it's called KTKK AM 630 radio. And we were talking about mining and how environmentally destructive that is and some other things. And he mentioned how some of their roads had been paved with radioactive tailings.
Yes. Let me tell you what I experienced there in Grand Junction. I used to operate out of Grand Junction to go down on claims that I had in Utah. And when I would run out of money, I would go work at a laboratory there in Grand Junction Labs for a great guy, a friend of mine, John Kephart, an excellent chemist. But the fact of the matter was that so many of those homes in Grand Junction were hot because tailings had been used from the mill there, that the Congress appropriated a number of millions of dollars to decontaminate those homes. So I had someone come up with a Reader's Digest article, which is abridged from something else, of course. And they showed me this, and I said, oh, my God. Even in the Reader's Digest version of this article, and this is back in the 70s, they said not a penny of that money was ever spent to decontaminate a single home. It stayed in those banks in Colorado that used it as they wished. And he said, let me show you something else. So he took me downtown Grand Junction, and he said, right here is where the tailing pile was. And there was said a Manor Bread Factory.
A bread factory? Okay.
Yeah, Manor Bread. So he took me around to where the intakes for the ovens were, and we had a dosimeter and stuck it down there, and it pegged. Oh, going right into the bread.
Yeah, it's really disgusting how little people care about life, It's really sad.
Well, I mean, here we have this going on, and we have people that are selling radon barriers for homes that probably you could never detect radon. If you went down, there would be some man-made reason for that radon to be high wherever you find it, where you can even pick it up with any kind of detector. But, it's something to sell, like with the black fungus.
That's right.
They condemn some homes because of black fungus.
In fact, let me try to put this into perspective in terms of how absurd it is. You've explained that if we had helium as a respirant, that we would live longer. We would live longer. We would look younger longer.
If it were just part of our restaurant.
Yeah. And that can be fixed, although not under the circumstances we have now because these people don't want it fixed. But imagine, so just imagine this scenario. Imagine the scientists of the world say, hey, this is true. We can fix this and we'll have helium and we'll live longer and we'll be healthier. And Avon and Maybelline and Oil of Olay, under the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, take all these governments to court and say, no, you can't fix this because then I won't be able to sell lotions that make people look younger. I mean,
do you know, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's exactly what would happen?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yes. That's how bad it is.
Well,
they would fight for their right to sell you face cream that would make you look younger.
We know the case of General Motors and Toyota scrapping out the EV1. We talked about that. Imagine what happens when General Motors decides that somebody comes up with a car that runs on water or that runs on solar energy, and the batteries are so incredible that you can charge up these batteries in 4 hours and they can take you 400 miles before you need to charge them up again. Now, that would be so incredible right there. Well,
right.
They would sue the inventor and say, you're hurting our profit taking.
That's right. And if people want to watch that documentary, it's called Who Killed the Electric Car? And I think they can find it on YouTube. It's excellent.
Oh, that is excellent. And bear in mind, they do this anyway through the patent office. People like Edison were allowed to get so many patents without a model, without even a good description of what they were getting a patent for, the workable description, which in some cases you can get. You get patent pending, rather. But they did this because Edison was so famous, and probably a few others like him. These were the darlings of the industrialists because they were going to protect the status quo and keep any new products that would threaten their market or their cartels to a minimum. They'd have that control. Mm-hmm. So today, there are people that come up with incredible things, and they go to get a patent so they can get the money to go in production. They can't get the patent because the patent office will say, oh, patent infringement. Automatically. It's too good, and they'll do that. So all of a sudden you have to prove you're not infringing anyone's patent.
That's also part of the TPP's evergreen patents. Yeah.
Well, I know that these goofball elite think that they can change it all for the better once that they've got the population of the earth down to 200 million or less, and they can have paradise and whatever, and then they'll figure out how to correct all the damage that's been done to the planet.
No, they can't.
They don't even know what kind of damage will be done once this depopulation goes into effect, and all kinds of opportunistic bad crap. Bacteria mutated this, mutated that. They have no idea what the end result will be. No. But it's always been there when things like this happen. So their pie-in-the-sky idea what they're going to have with their self-proclaimed expedience for the greater good shit, pardon me.
That's right. No, that's true.
That is going to be taken care of miraculously because they're doing the right thing, right? They're doing the right thing. And they keep telling themselves this, and they've got minions that tell them that. And basically, anyone true to the instincts of a human being knows that they're evil, knows that they're a stigma. The population knows they're aberrant, knows
a cancer. They're a cancer.
They are. They are.
And they will kill their host if they are not stopped.
They will kill their host.
That's right.
You were talking about the cremation of care. I think, rather than just not caring, I think the cremation of care is more the loss of empathy for anyone that gets in your way.
Absolutely.
I think that's the ultimate meaning of that. Of course, they word it in such a way, it's like anything else that's ritually practiced. It's a little bit off the note. So you can do the wink-wink, tongue-in-the-cheek thing.
That's true, but I have to say that they're getting really arrogant and brazen because part of the cremation of care ceremony is the burning of the effigy of a baby. And
That's
we
right.
saw a massive, large scale of that at the Olympics, and it was pretty awful. And I don't know how people missed it, you know?
Well, they don't want to believe it in the first place. You take John Kerry. John Kerry once had some prestige.
He may have also had a conscience. Maybe that's why he was replaced.
Well, whatever is there today, whatever it once was, what it is now, has no sign of recognized humanity.
No, not at all.
Absolutely none. His actions are plunging a proud country and a wonderful people into the abyss.
I've often said that they're killing nature to kill us, but I think that as time goes by, I'm becoming more and more convinced that there are so many rogue programs running. Inasmuch as they don't want us to have any overview, I don't think they do either. I think that there are all these little pockets being funded to do this, that, and the other, but at no point has any of them sat down and looked at the overall picture of how all of those things are interconnected and what the consequences will be. I don't really think that they know.
They know. These are the people that have had access to those halls of records.
That's right.
They
In
know.
terms of their super rogue science, I think that maybe there's just a part of me that really does believe that some of these horrific Frankenstein black ops projects were started by people that are no longer here and have just ran amok. And the scientists know that as long as they keep popping out what the people want to hear, they'll keep getting their grant money. And nobody's really minding the entire store anymore.
You've seen the movie The Cube, haven't you?
No, I don't think I have.
You haven't seen that movie?
No,
it is about a group of people. They get abducted and wake up, and they are in one of those projects run amok that the creators have long since forgotten any use for, any design for.
I tell you, it kind of makes sense. But, you know, again, going back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and this huge corporate conglomerate that's being given carte blanche global domination, this is a really good example. I mean, I gave a fictitious one in terms of, you know, if we could put helium back in our atmosphere, how Revlon would complain their sales would go down. But there is a very real lawsuit going on right now with Bayer and Syngenta against the European Union Commission because their pesticides were banned for killing millions of bees. And so they're suing because, well, who cares if your bees are dying? You're interfering with my right to make money. That's really how absurd and insane it is. But
Yes.
They just don't care.
Well, you know, I was going to suggest a subtitle for the show tonight, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agenda, or When Greed Isn't Enough.
Yeah, I think when greed isn't enough is really good because, you know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is just one more arm on the octopus. Yeah. But it really goes back to the pattern of the greed, the arrogance and the greed of a very small number of people on the planet who have done some very awful, dastardly things to ensure that they keep that power at any cost. And the cost is high, even for them.
Well, I think when we look at it, we see the ultimate in the megalomania. We see people that if I can't be the God of the Bible, I will be Shiva, the goddess of destruction.
The destroyer, yeah. Because these people don't care, which is part of their ceremony, the Cremation of Care. You burn it so that you don't care, so that you can be cruel and aggressive enough to get what you want at any cost. They want to, and I believe this, and I've written about it in both books before, they want to become God. They want complete control over creation so that they can do with it what they want. But the problem is that when you approach creation with that mindset, by default, it no longer is creation, it's destruction. It's a given. And that's the track that they're on.
They know that because of the history they have seen before their eyes in these finds. Now, I know that there's science and there's technology they don't know about. They're given this pie-in-the-sky thing. A number of them probably think they can escape, like Bigelow, for instance. They can escape to outer space, or they can't. They think that they can go underground and live indefinitely underground. They can't. They have all of these fallbacks and none of them are worth a flip.
Yes, that's right. And I just want to let people know really quickly, especially for new listeners, when it comes to what's really going on with the chemtrails and why the sun looks whiter, the sun isn't changing. The atmosphere through which we view and experience the sun has changed. And this goes back to the atmospheric microbes. There's an article that I wrote some time ago on both my website and James's website called Microbes and Machiavellian Mindsets that goes into this and provides links to sources of what is referred to as aerobiology. People know this. People know that these microbes actually affect the climate and the weather and are part of our atmosphere. And what you were just saying, these people believe that they can go and hide. There's another article that I wrote that is on both of our websites. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but at my website, it's on the cosmology tab, which goes into all of this, the playing cards that NASA had, why that stopped, Norman Berggren and the fungus. It's very, very in-depth, and people really need to get educated about it because the alternative media is not being honest with you. They're not, any more than the mainstream media is. And this is something that people are going to have to begin looking at because it's a very sad thing when you finally get someone, it's so difficult for so many of us to get someone, a family member or a friend to flip that switch and get it so that they will unplug from the mainstream media, and by default, the, quote, alternative media is the alternative, but it's not. In so many ways, it's really not. So that's really important for people to recognize, and it's really, I think, our goal, both of us, to give people back the knowledge that they need so that they can self-direct their own futures. But again, knowledge isn't enough. It's not enough to just know what needs to be done. Knowing doesn't fix anything. You have to act on it. That's super important.
Crystal, I can understand why I wouldn't be accepted or promoted in any way by the big guns of the alternative media, but you are another matter. You are excellent, and I think because that you're out there with the truth and in your face with it, and rightly so, and don't miss a beat, that makes you dangerous to them. You'd be on Rinse, you would be on Red Ice, you'd be on all of these big deal shows that wouldn't think of having me on there. It's just like when I was invited to that energy conference in Boulder. Once they found out that I may say something to upset some people, well, he's too controversial. An alternative energy conference, and I'm
That's
too
right.
controversial. Even today, I ought to be putting this behind me, I know, but it's still...
Well, it's funny that you brought it up because I almost brought it up a while ago when you were talking about the pipeline in Russia and all that because, look, all of that is passé old junk science that doesn't serve us anymore. No. But in order to move on, we need to get the gatekeepers out of the way. So the reason I almost brought it up is because for people listening, James was invited to a global energy conference that I think actually begins in October.
October 12th and 13th.
In Colorado. But here's what's interesting. Once James expressed his desire to share with people once he got there, the need to begin to address the oppression in terms of the patent office and our shadow government and all these other things that must be addressed before free energy will ever become part of our reality, they turned him off. They didn't want him anymore. And I'll tell you what I think about this, and this is the truth. I think that probably 90% of the people out there going to these conferences all puffed up, look, I'm going to change everything because I've got a free energy device. I don't think any of them actually work. And I think that people won't know they don't work as long as they can't actually get them out. So they're safe, aren't they?
And they're getting contributions, too.
Oh, yes. There's one company who has been accepting donations for 10 years and still only has a prototype. What does that tell you? 10 years. So I think the reason they don't want to solve the problem that keeps them from getting their devices to market hinges on the fact that they know their devices don't work. They're theoretical because, they can't manifest these devices for sale in an industrial way because they don't live in an environment that will let them do that. So it protects their intellectual property in terms of theoretical devices. They're theoretical. And hey, that's great. But when you get to a place where you can actually release them, well, then we're going to know which ones work and which ones don't.
You probably have to go to China to find an assembly line to put it together, or Mexico.
Well, I hope not. And, another interesting thing that I wanted to bring up, too, is my husband and I really cringe every time we see somebody driving a Prius, because there's an excellent video out there, and I'll see if I can round it up. I know my husband knows where it is, but the Prius is more caustic to the environment than any other car they've ever built. The damage it does for mining, for the batteries that they use, the tires are too small, so you constantly have to replace the tires. It's god-awful. It's worse than any other car they've built, but they're electric. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd what people will buy because the commercials slapped a green leaf on the damn thing.
They got one now called a Leaf. I've seen a couple of commercials about it. It'll go about 90 miles on a charge, which isn't half bad, but, it's probably got problems too.
Well, my husband, he's a nostalgic individual who really loves old cars, and he knows, and actually he has some of the ads. I'll have to get some and scan them from, the 50s and 60s where they had cars that got 50 miles a gallon. But here we are 70 years later with cars that are made of plastic that weigh half as much and still don't get, not even close to the gas mileage the other cars used to get, and they're junk, they're throwaway cars.
Throwaway cars.
That's really important to reiterate, I think probably as often as we can, is that the planned obsolescence is really a big part of the destruction of our environment, because they can make products, they can make printers that last 10 years, they can make print cartridges that actually use all the ink, but the faster those garbage dumps fill up, the faster their profit margins go up. It's not you and me, it's not the middle class. Bill Gates very specifically said we have to destroy the middle class because they consume too much. And he's talking about how we buy so many things and we throw them away and then we buy more and it's a strain on the resources of the planet. But, they plan it that way and now they're blaming us.
They plan it that way. It's in their marketing. If you could upgrade a printer, for instance, with software, and they had spare parts, like with electronics that have panels that you can interchange component parts, think about how much less of this would end up in landfills. So many ways of looking at it, but you see, that's not what they're interested in. They say one thing out of one side of their mouth while they are planning their next coup d'etat and marketing scheme, which they don't care about how much that adds to city dumps. They don't care about anything other than what their bottom line is. They will sell you a printer for $40. And you get it home.
It's $70 for the cartridges, and
that's right.
And there's still ink in the damn thing when it tells you it's empty.
That's right. And of course, they work constantly on devising these cartridges that cannot be filled from these ink supplies that you get cheaply. Or if they can be, you're going to get this toxic ink all over you trying. Everything that they can do to make money, and they don't give a damn about anything else. But these are the owners of these corporations that have these policies are the very ones that are touting global warming. They're touting, too many people, and secretly talking about depopulation, and sometimes openly.
Yes, and these monsters were created, these corporate monstrosities were created because eventually, once they were brought into the fold and their greed was catered to, eventually it would be no stretch to go from the planned obsolescence of a product to a person.
That's right. Well, it's the same thing to them. That's getting right back to the cremation of care. This is a euphemism or a metaphor, what have you, that goes above and below one example at several levels with conveying the same basic meaning. What is in our way, we can get rid of without any tinge of conscience. Whatever, whether it's a person, whether it's an animal, whether it's the wealth of the planet, whether it's the ocean, whether it's the air we breathe or anything. To have any regard for health of any kind, you see, that is to be cremated. Now, what are we taught through tradition to believe that corresponds with? That corresponds with Satan. to turn everything good upside down.
That's exactly right. And people don't know that. I'm so sick of movies showing a pentagram right side up and saying, oh, look, it's evil. The pentagram right side up is really Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and that the mind, the sentient mind, is at the top. When it's upside down, you've got the animal, the baser forces.
The goat. You got the
That's
goat,
right.
which is the symbol of Satan.
And not only that, but, I've tried to explain to people that the devil himself, the image that they use is a chimera. It's a mishmash of all this stuff stuck together. It's got hooves and claws and horns, and it's part human and part animal. And I don't know why the church can put that image out and not understand that that is an absolute violation of creational law, but then turn around and say, yeah, we approve GMOs.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I'll tell you, anybody that draws their moral blood from an institution as disingenuous in its moral teaching as the Catholic Church is in trouble. No wonder so many mobsters have attended its rituals so devotingly when there is absolutely nothing else that represents in the slightest anything spiritual they're a part of. And I put spiritual in quotation marks.
Mm. Yeah, pseudo-spirituality. Spirituality without morality is bereft at best.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, and that's exactly true. And morality, you see, is not a license to be silent when harm is being done to those around you.
And it's not subjective.
No, never is subjective. There's one truth, and one truth alone. There's one reality, and one reality alone. And when people talk about different realities or different truths or whatever, beware.
That's right. That's right. Well, James, we went over a little bit tonight, and I did want to get into Comet Ison, but because I didn't get to put together enough material, going down the road I wanted to go in terms of properly re-educating people about cosmology. Maybe we can get through some of the mythology behind cosmology. Maybe we can save that for next week, unless there's something else you wanted to talk about next week.
No, I certainly want you to be 100% before we keep any late nights.
I feel much better. It's just the last month has been really rough. First the pinched nerve and then the flu. So I don't know if people can tell. I'm a little cranky. My edges are a little sharper. Can you tell?
I was stuttering and out of my element when the show started, and you came in and picked it up and did marvelously. I'm going to let you start all the shows now. Is that okay?
No, you don't. Nice try, though. No, but I think we should wrap it up for tonight, and if you don't mind, we'll lump Comet Ison in with getting through the mythology of our cosmology, because people need proper knowledge, because it's like anything else. If someone comes to you and says, hey, this is a sure thing, give me all of your life savings. If you don't have anything to compare it to, if you don't have any yardstick or other knowledge, you're going to get taken for a ride, because you just don't know. You can't make informed decisions that benefit you, and that's the whole point. So anything we can do to give people back what has been stolen from them purposefully, I think is a step in the right direction to make sure that we not only have a future, but it's the right one.
That's right. And before we go, I'd like to say this about Comet Ison. At the beginning of millennium, at the beginning of events that have been noted as catastrophic in one way or the other, like the beginning of the Mediterranean, for instance, there was the foreboding comet. It's built in to each legend about civilizations collapsing and the end of a city like Pompeii. All of these things are supposedly hearkened by a comet. And if that is to be attached to Ison, it is by design, nefarious social engineering design. And don't buy into it.
That's true. I've been watching this series on Netflix called The 4400 that came out a few years ago, where a bunch of people were taken somewhere from different time periods, and then they were all brought back. They were taken by people in the future, enhanced with certain abilities, and then put back into the past so that they could prevent some kind of cataclysm. And it was really funny. this comet. They thought it was a comet that was coming in, and this is what was delivering these 4,400 people back to Earth in the same location. And this woman, she really got it. They said, oh, the comet changed course. And she said, well, then it's not a comet, is it?
Well, I love people to trust their senses and draw their own conclusions, because we don't have enough of that. We have so many smart people. If they'd only rely on their smarts, if they'd only believe that, yes, what you see and what you figured out, and this is one thing that I admire Kevin Smith for, if you see it, if you can reach out and touch it, that's what it is. What you see, what you think it is, that's what it is. Believe it. Don't wait for somebody with a PhD or from some bureau in the government to come around and tell you and then feel like that's put you any closer to the mark. Except that you have the intelligence and you have the senses that you, as a creature of God, let's say, as a creature of sentience, as a creature that has received the gift of sentience, that you have that. You have that innately. Once people realize this and take it upon themselves as a mantle, which is just as important as the robes that a PhD wears in ceremony.
That's very true. And, I honor the fierce individualist because they have that right and they are unique. And there's a video I found some time ago. I'll see if I can round it up again. It was a very interesting experiment that I think was conducted in the 70s where they had maybe 6, 7 people sitting at this table, and everybody was in on it except for one person who was genuinely brought in from the outside to participate in this experiment. And in front of all these people on a table were images, and one was lines. It was like 3 lines, and people were supposed to put down which line they thought was the shortest. And because everybody was in on it except for this one person, everybody put the wrong line except for him. And as it kept happening, this individual, absolutely knowing without a shadow of a doubt what was right, began to put down what they put down because he didn't want to stand out.
Yeah. No. I've been there. I've done that. Crystal, haven't you done that too?
Went with the flow just to get along.
When you were, say, maybe 12 years old. Maybe.
I was kicked out of preschool when I was 4, so.
You've always been like that. Wonderful.
I don't have a lot of examples of going along to get along in my life because I just don't get it,
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
So all right, we'll wrap it up. And again, I would like to thank Dave Corso. He's being very, very gracious, letting our colleagues put these out for free on YouTube. But again, as a reminder for people who prefer the MP3 files for their iPods or whatever, you do have to subscribe. His rates are low. It's a great show. And he's just a very gracious individual. And I'm glad that we connected with him and are doing this show. And we'll be back the second week of October.
Yes.
I thought it was the second week of October myself.
It is, right? That's our next show. The second Friday of the month is the second week of October, right?
Oh, that's next month. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's one of those days.
This is Wolf Spirit Radio.